So it's really amazing to be here, and it's a wonderful privilege. I will try to do something that I'm not really accustomed to. I will try to leave you with questions rather than answers, because I run a company and organization that actually has to always every day give answers to all these questions, otherwise we can't do any business. So I will try to put what we do a little bit to the back burner and really talk about the issue we're trying to tackle. Will did an amazing job in setting the scene here. You know, he showed you that wonderful slide about the massive urbanization that is going on around the world. You're all familiar with those numbers. Cities are growing rapidly, and not just in scale or numbers, but actually in importance. The reason why we are interested in cities is that for two reasons. The first reason is that they're usually the closest level of government to the citizen. You know, if a girl gets run over on a bicycle in London, it will be the mayor, not the prime minister, who may kind of have to take a position in front of media, in front of the family, and explain why that street crossing was badly conceived or designed. It's the mayors that are typically more responsive, and the mayors are the closest to their citizens in many ways as an institution. But we also talk about cities. I talk about cities a little bit more broadly because we think of cities and local government as one group. So we don't really segregate between the size of the city, but we think it's just important to think about that level of government. The second reason why we're interested in cities is that cities spend 10% of world GDP every year. 10% of world GDP destined to help citizens. If you imagine that, you know, that's kind of like the biggest social and economic development fund ever. And of course, the question I would like to enter into is how well they do that and how much we understand about how that works and how much more we might be able to get out of this. And then lastly, in an age of technology, technology allows us to scale things much faster. Scale the communication, scale information, scale learning methods, but of course also solutions. And this is something we're in an age of technology where we can really no longer have any excuses of saying each of our communities is isolated. We have to look at the global issues that will present it in global terms, but we also have to understand that in a technology enabled world, we have to work in a marketplace that allows that to happen. So I'll start with a simple question. Who runs our cities? You know, and each of you will have a different perspective on this, will have a different view on this. But the deputy mayor of Eindhoven, she says the citizens are now running my city. They're in charge because they have technology, they have mechanisms at their disposal to actually almost directly run their city. And what do we mean by that? I come from Germany, and in the early 1970s when I grew up, people were chaining themselves to trees to protest against nuclear material transports. And I, with my family, like everyone else, was sitting in front of the television thinking, who are these people? What are they doing out in the forest chaining themselves to railway tracks? When every scientist in the world, every political leader, every business leader, everyone in the world agreed that nuclear power was the best and safest thing ever. And there were these people chaining themselves to trees. And then, of course, they tried to create a movement. They tried to create a party. And after many years, laboriously, they got elected into local parliament in the state of Bremen. In 1980, they had 1.5% in national polls. That's nothing. That doesn't get you into parliament in Germany. And then 87, Chernobyl happened. 8.3% in the national vote. Suddenly, these people that were the naggers, the moaners, the guys that were tying themselves to trees were suddenly meaningful. They suddenly had a purpose, and people said, why on earth, how did they figure that out? And they just were against nuclear power, largely because they didn't understand it. They said, look, if I can't understand it, you know, how can I trust it? And on it went, and of course, those of you that know a little bit about German politics will know that now they're the third mainstream political party in Germany. In 2011, they polled at 24%, and this movement took 40 years to create. Now, That 40-year movement created a market, and just kind of rationalizing this to the latest kind of round of investment here, the economic recovery funds in the financial and economics collapse that we've just lived through totaled 435 billion euros, something like 600 billion US dollars in green funding for green technologies, green solutions, green measures. That is when a citizen movement becomes a market, and we're really interested in that relationship. Nowadays, citizens do this somewhat differently. They can use this device here, Citizen Sense Pod, that connects via Bluetooth to your mobile phone, and they can measure humidity, temperature, and all kinds of other things. When we want to pilot this device in 5 European cities about 5 years ago, no city agreed to pilot this. We said, look, we want to give 100 of these to citizens to try it out, to see what happens. And all the cities said, no, we don't want our citizens to find out how noisy it is, how well the air quality is, you know. They'll be complaining that their district is worse than the other and so forth. So all of the cities said no. And in Japan, of course, we had a very interesting experience around this. The government data in the Fukushima crisis showed that you see the red and yellow there on the left side, showed that there was some radiation problem. Well, within 24 hours, citizens had plugged their own Geiger counters into their smartphones, connected to PadTube, a global data streaming site, and created their own maps. Now, the government, the ministry in Japan, didn't post this map. They posted lists with just printed out numbers on the inside door of the ministry that would be shut every evening. So creating these maps, visualizing this, and as you know, within a matter of weeks, the Japanese establishment, the entire scientific, technological, economic, political establishment around nuclear technology was in trouble, was shaken, and it toppled governments and industries in that sense. So what used to take 40 years, we might be able to emulate much, much faster right now. But there's another dimension to the engagement of citizens, and that is that the citizen may not know what is possible. So in 2011, the mayor of Minnesota received a White Cane Award for installing speaking traffic lights for blind people. So this is a traffic light where you hit the button, and the traffic light will tell you where you are. It's an absolutely wonderful device. It solves a problem that not even 1% of blind people will ever experience in their whole life, because they don't get lost very much. But it's a backup measure. It costs $4.5 million US dollars, and the blind population saw this as a wonderful gesture towards their needs. Just about the same time, we met Boris here on the picture with a stripy shirt, and he told us that he now feels 90% less disabled. He uses a small navigation aid that the city of Stockholm developed together with a startup company. It costs the city 369,000 euros per year, not $4.5 million. And it actually gives the city almost a $20 million return on investment every year, because Boris now feels 90% less disabled. Boris can go anywhere in the city. He no longer needs transport help. He no longer needs physical rehabilitation. He can actually do a lot of things that he couldn't do before and that the government had to provide. But also, most importantly, Boris can find work. He no longer sees himself as being disconnected from society. So it's a simple technology. It doesn't actually require any fancy stuff. Most cities, certainly in the developed world, are able to deploy this within 9 months, for example. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, why in the same year did the blind in Minnesota think that a speaking traffic light was a breakthrough, was worth giving an award for? When, you know, do the almost 400,000 blind New Yorkers know that they could live like Boris? Who should tell them? Is it the job of government? Is it the job of the blind people to figure out themselves on Facebook nowadays or elsewhere? Whose job is it? And actually, that's a critical thing, because this is like going into an Apple store in Minnesota and buying the first Mac computer, when in Stockholm you get an iPad, you know, for the same money or less, you know, actually significantly less. This is unthinkable in any other industry, but of course in local government we're used to tolerate this. So if we close our eyes for a moment and think about what is our experience of our local governments. Is our experience the enablement we saw in Stockholm, or is it maybe a little more like Minnesota? Plan B, a young musician, very, very successful musician and movie producer raised on a London council estate. He gave in a TED talk he gave at The Observer, he said, the government takes your taxes and we know they're not going to do the right thing with it. You know, that's just another way of putting where Will presented government on the trust index. We don't expect, you know, and I don't say we, I say our citizens don't expect that the right thing will happen. And that's why he's promoting setting up all kinds of NGOs and social enterprises and so forth. But what a depressing proposition. So the question we ask, what would it be like if we began to associate government with being open, with being agile, with being empathic, not defending the bureaucracy of government, but actually defending and trying to support the needs and opportunities for citizens? So here's the challenge. There are 557,000 cities and communities around the world. They spend an unbelievable amount of money every year, and we have no idea how they do that. Absolutely no idea. And we ourselves focus on defining this around 5 barriers, and through your dialogues and so on, I'm sure you can find many others or confirm or criticize those. But basically, the first thing is that they have a lack of knowledge. So we're spending $4.5 trillion a year with an average of about, on a good day, about 3% market intelligence knowledge about how you could best spend that money. The guys in Minnesota clearly thought that a speaking traffic light was an extremely wise decision. There's a lack of trust. Decision makers in government don't trust entrepreneurs. They don't trust the providers of solutions like the navigation system, but instead they go back to the people they know, which happen to provide maybe the speaking traffic light. There's a lack of listening. Only about, and this is really a generous self-reporting, I think the proportion is even lower, but 13% of cities say they have a mechanism in place to receive unsolicited proposals, to receive new ideas and process that information into their decision-making. We have a lack of signal. Not even 1% of cities around the world are publishing what they actually need, what problems they want to solve. There's no way you can find out. And imagine you have this great invention, and then you're looking at a world of 557,000 local governments, and then you say, who's going to be my first customer? If none of your customers are actually saying, look, we're trying to achieve this or that. And there's a lack of method. Not a single pair of cities, not even London and Birmingham or elsewhere, are sharing any methods alike. In fact, they're doing everything they can to create different variations on the same kind of regulations. There's no 2 cities in the world that measure CO2 emissions in the same way. And that is to protect the market. That is to do everything to keep the discretionary power of government in place. So City Mart, just to give you a sense, we're an organization, as Elspeth said, that tries to help cities to kind of find a common method around this. We're trying to help cities to share solutions, to exploit those things that work elsewhere and begin to understand that they can do this differently. And our impact is measured as to how much transformation they bring to their community. And what we found, and we've tried for a long, long time, we've tried all kinds of things, you know, as to how one might approach this problem. In fact, every advisor and mentor we ever had said, don't go into this market, get out of it. No local government in the world will ever change. They're corrupt, they're intransparent, they're protectionist. Doesn't matter whether you talk to Stockholm or to Naples or to Nairobi. And then, you know, being an entrepreneur, you kind of figure, well, that sounds just about the right size problem that I want to tackle. so here we go. But after a lot of experimenting and studying and trying to figure out what works, we found that actually the simplest and probably the only viable way to do this is cities begin to publish their needs. It's very simple. It's a lot like open data works. It gives you access to information. It's not enough to get access to information after the things have happened. You need to know in real time how the city is moving to prioritize what is being, what are we spending on, what are our intentions, what problems are we trying to solve. And I'll give you some examples of this in a minute. But the interesting thing is, as we're going along with this process with quite a large number of cities, they're creating a common map of opportunities, a common map of their needs that looks very, very different from many other maps of mega trends in cities and so forth. And this is because cities are focusing on strategic issues, but they're also focusing on issues that have multiple impacts on employment, on economic development, and so forth. And they frame the problems in a very interesting way. The cities are jointly cataloging these solutions, where our work is providing an open platform, the world's largest catalog of solutions for cities, that every time a city gives us a problem, we're expanding the catalog and building this shared resource to make it easier to share. And cities set the rules for trust. Kind of pretty technical little thing we're doing, but we actually have developed a protocol by which cities demand from companies, from entrepreneurs, that they explain and present their solutions so they can trust the information. And that's a massive enabler, even though it's kind of quite a small technical adjustment we're making there. And then cities and providers share the reporting. We're encouraging technology providers to not just talk about the great antenna they've invented or the great app, but to think about how a mobile app actually contributes to the 4 dimensions of sustainability that most of the cities are nowadays using to understand how they're progressing towards their objectives. And cities trade in inspiring solutions. Now, this is almost impossible for you to see here, but it's actually, if you go to the link down here, if you were to look at that, you see how cities, through our work, are trading solutions, and how those cities that are opening up most to outside solutions are in fact becoming also the best exporters of solutions. It's exactly the idea of a common market, how that can actually unfold in both give and take scenario, and how we're beginning to structure something that is very complicated. And a lot of cities are taking up this method, and right now we as a small organization with just 17 people have really had an impact on almost 8 million lives in 39 cities around the world already, and that number keeps growing. So, but let me talk about contextualizing this with, when we talk about how can technologies maybe solve some of the pressing societal challenges and economic challenges we have. I'll give you 3 examples of how that can work. Most of you that live and work in cities will know that LED lights are low energy, are very useful, and that a lot of lighting producers are trying to sell us an upgrade to low energy lights. San Francisco was actually going a little step further. They said, look, we want to have one of those lights, but actually those lights come with a wireless antenna on top to control them so that you can switch them on and off and change colors and do all kinds of great things. And they said, look, it would be great if we could choose what to do with that antenna. Very simple request, no? And it turns out that none of the lighting providers in the world actually reveals their code. It's proprietary. So you're buying a streetlight for 25 years with a control system on it, and you can't control it. So they ran 3 $20 million RFPs with us, trying to source a system that is open. And in the end, they gave us the challenge, and we found 59 solutions. And incidentally, it was not one of the big lighting manufacturers that had the solution. No, it was a tiny little company from Switzerland called Paradox Engineering with just 23 employees that had the best solution. And this is because they never had an opportunity to tender for this stuff, because no one ever allowed them into the door. No one ever asked the right question. So they were selected from 59 solutions, and just 3 months later, the solution was up and running in the city as a pilot. 3 months later, imagine the life cycle of government. 3 months later, we have it on the street, and we were able to prove that it rationalizes 8 urban networks, that the rollout cost is just $3 million, and that it will immediately save the city $27 million. Now, $27 million, you know, that's money you can put in other things that citizens might really care about, you know, like education, health, social services, or tax rebates, whatever takes your fancy. So, very, very simple. This was just opening the problem and redefining the process by not procuring what you think you want, but procuring the best solution you can find. Now, when we started working with Lagos, we imagined, God, you know, we're going to get one of those impossible challenges, you know. How do we find violence, poverty? I mean, you know, our imagination was going wild. And then we got the real challenge, and we were a little bit surprised when that email arrived. Well, we want to do work on video piracy. And we said, look, guys, you know, why would Lagos, of all things, want to work on video piracy? Well, because those of you, of course, that know Lagos in Nigeria know that about 1 million people in Lagos work in the second most productive movie industry in the world, Nollywood. And that generates $500 million in revenue. And of course, there's a massive opportunity in already having the leading world global cluster in movie production to work with that as a resource. But sadly, of course, Nollywood movies are pirated to about 80 and 90%, meaning that the lost GDP to 1 million people producing the movies is about $4 billion a year. So they were simply saying, look, this is one of the biggest social uplift opportunities. If we can actually bring more revenue to those 1 million people, we can actually achieve a lot of things. They gave us a challenge on how to reduce video piracy. This is a procurement statement. You know, have you ever seen what an RFP looks like? 25 pages, problem description or what you want, and then another 40 pages of conditions to protect everyone. Well, this was it. And a small startup from Honolulu, eggup.com, had exactly the right technology, together with a social enterprise that is linked to the Berkman Center at Harvard. And together they were putting forward a program that was called the Nollywood Upgrade Project. And it was really a combination of technology, investment, and training to be deployed. A year later, Lagos announced the creation of a $1 million training and film investment fund that was governed by the movie makers, together with the state government, together with Harvard University. It's the first transparently managed film fund in Africa. And that brought on the agenda interest from the Gates Foundations and others who are interested in investing in movie and using it as a kind of social messaging tool, but had never found a conduit to actually invest in. This year, Lagos started to also approve a plan to develop 57 community cinemas, because Nigeria has almost no cinema infrastructure. It has the world's second largest movie producing cluster, but no cinemas to actually exploit them in the city. And the result of a different challenge, but just as interesting, is that just at the end of last year, we started piloting resilient wireless digital access points in Lagos. And this is really directed to the slum areas that have no reliable energy or internet access. But of course, there's a massive opportunity in bringing digital content to citizens. And the business model of these hotspots is, in fact, Nollywood content. It is the place where actually you can download the Nollywood movies onto your mobile and other devices. So this is a kind of very unusual technology challenge, but it's so tightly linked to the socioeconomic opportunity that the state in that case saw. Now, here are two things that usually you say in one sentence: big data and manhole covers. You know, this is a kind of, and again, it was one of those things that surprised us a little bit, but makes a lot of sense. So Boston, like most American cities, is struggling with financial cuts, is struggling with how to actually keep track of information in the city. And the way we usually know about the quality of our urban infrastructure is by sending inspectors around. Well, when the city wanted to know about the quality of the road surfaces, they had no budget to send enough inspectors out to find out what happens. So they had a wonderful idea to create an iPhone app that is called Street Bump, that uses the vibration, the accelerometer, to detect the vibration in the ground. And citizens just took the app and did 60,000 inspection trips through the city, mapping all the road surfaces, and then the city could just analyze the data. Of course, a much more effective way than sending inspectors around. And they found that sinking manhole covers were the biggest problem. So here again, a wonderful RFP statement. We want to reinvent 30,000 manhole covers, replace them quickly and avoid future sinking. Because replacing them today takes 3 days of road works with a local construction company that digs up the road, blocks the road, and then they will sink the day after again. They will go back into the ground. So again, 4 months later, after finding the solution, they started piloting underground technologies, elevation ring, which sounds very exciting. It's a very exciting product, as you can see. But the potential is massive. It can be replaced in most cases within 30 minutes. It comes at much lower cost, and it comes with a 75-year guarantee against sinking into the ground. Everyone loves it. Of course, not the local construction mafia. They hate it. because 3 days of road work was quite a cozy arrangement, times 30,000 contracts, and now there might be a bit of a revolution going on. So now the interesting thing for us is really how this can change a system. How this can change a system, how this can affect things. You're not using this to procure toilet paper, but how you work with this on problem solving. And we've gone quite some distance with Barcelona on this. So when you look at the city budget of Barcelona over a 4-year period, which is about $2.5 billion spending a year, we kind of looked at what is the transformative potential of this? What would happen if we actually did this at scale? And the interesting thing is that we can, at very, very conservative estimate, and this is not done by us, this was done by McKinsey, assuming just 1% of city spending would be used through this mechanism, that actually they could generate 400 million euros almost in economic benefit for the city budget. 400 million euros is a lot of money for anyone. But also, this is how you bring about the transformation to people like Boris and others that can experience things. And in fact, the city uses this not just to lower cost and spend money more efficiently, but the city is actually actively trying to involve entrepreneurs to continually improve the way they manage. They see themselves as such an important economic actor that they're part of shaping the markets and stimulating innovation and entrepreneurship in the city, and have now created an innovation fund, an investment fund that actively co-finances these kind of procurements. Now what happens here in terms of value for the citizen and maybe many others is that in 2008, Barcelona publicly evaluated 2 solutions. Talking about ideas being presented to the city, they evaluated 2. In 2013, they evaluated more than 900 solutions with making the data public, learning from it, and actually having a proper process of evaluation. And that's the secret behind it, that you're actually exposing some of the decision-making, involving experts, and actually taking a lot of the backroom processes out onto the street. So when I said why we took on this challenge to work with cities, in particular procurement, it's because global local government spending is just this unbelievable resource, and it's so ineffectively managed. And actually, if we add just a little bit of improvement to it, and there may be many other ways in which one can do this, we're actually releasing a massive impulse for change. And at the end of the day, the difference is not just financial, but it can really make a difference on whether this lady in Minnesota gets a speaking traffic light or whether she can be 90% less disabled at much, much lower cost.
Thank you, Sascha.